Welcome to Take Care with the Rowing Therapist. I'm your host, Danielle Waagmeester. Today's guest is truly an honor to have on the show Jim Dietz, six-time Olympian, world silver medalist, and one of the most influential coaches in American rowing history. He's trained thousands of athletes and is known for producing more coaches than any other coach in the sport. He continues to shape the future of the sport through initiatives like the All-American Rowing Camp, where rowers of all skill levels can benefit from his wisdom, expertise, and encouragement. What really stands out about Jim is how he coaches with heart. He's funny, wise, generous with his stories, and deeply committed to helping people believe in themselves on and off the water. Whether you're a rower or not, this conversation is about something universal, how one person's encouragement can change everything. Jim, thanks for being here. Let's
Thanks
dive
for
in.
having me.
Absolutely. So let's start at the beginning. Let's talk about, when did rowing first become part of your life and what drew you in?
Well, all through uh, grammar school, I guess I was a basketball player like most people growing up in the Bronx. And I went off in high school and I was planning on playing basketball. And in the early fall, I was running track like my older brother, following in his footsteps. And that day, three big guys came down and looked at me and said, "You're big enough. You're going to come with us and we're going to beat the crap out of you." So, to save myself a beating, I went with these guys and they took me up to the New York Athletic Club where the high school had a rowing team, and that's how I started. As soon as I saw the boats in the water, I was hooked. That was it.
Nice. You've had such a long career, athlete, coach, storyteller. When you look back, what moments feel like turning points?
Turning points, there were so many of them at the time, and I tell kids that, in this journey that you take, you're going to make mistakes. And I remember the first time I got the head coach, who became my Olympic coach, his attention was at a high school race on a Friday afternoon after school. And on the way up to the club, I did what most kids do. I went into a deli and I got myself a quart of milk and two packages of Hostess cupcakes, thinking that's going to make me big and strong for the race. Well, at the end of the race, I'm projectile vomiting on the guy in front of me. And the coach comes over and says, "Son, are you okay?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm fine." And he goes, "Well, that's good. You worked hard. Keep working hard. That's what's going to pay off." And that was one of the turning points of my life.
Wow, beautiful. Any others?
There was another when I was training for the first World Junior Championship. I had the fortune to be training against Don Sparrow, who was an elite sculler that won the '66 World Championships in Klagenfurt, Austria. And that morning, as the coach is driving me up to the club, he tells me, "You're going to do six 500s against Don Sparrow this morning. But this is the way I want you to do it. I want you to just try to hold with him for the first four pieces. And on the fifth piece, I want you to win." And I had seen this guy sculling up and down the river. He's the world champion. I'm thinking, there's no way I can hang with this guy. But I do what my coach tells me. First four pieces, I just hang within a couple of lengths of him, pushing along. On the fifth piece, I might have jumped the start a little bit. I get out in front and I hold the lead and I win the piece. But the thing about the day was the last piece. On the last piece, you could stick a fork in me. I was done. I had absolutely nothing left. And I started to pull up about 100 meters before the finish line. And this world champion starts yelling at me, "Don't stop. You always have enough to finish. You never stop. An oarsman never stops. You just keep going." And that stuck with me forever, right? The body is infinite. It's the mind that's weak. You always have more to give.
Wow, that's truly phenomenal. So you've coached Olympians, beginners, and everyone in between. What's stayed the same in your coaching philosophy through the years?
I think what you want to give everybody is your best. So whether I'm coaching a junior that's never sat in a boat before or a master that's never sat in a boat before, I want to train them like I would train the best. All right. And, a big part of it is the technique and the attitude you have to have when you're in a boat. You have to be all present, you have to be focused all the time. And you have to keep bringing people into that focal point. And you have to do more than just tell them do this. You have to tell them why you want them to do this. You have to educate people along the way. And I think that that's what's paid off the most. And I think that's why so many coaches out there have followed in my footsteps and are coaching because they learned that way.
Yeah, beautiful. What do you think helps make a good coach of especially adult rowers?
Paying attention, you really have to be detail oriented, little things. I tell coaches, you have to have a picture in your mind of what you want this sculler to look like and not be happy until they look like you want them to look, right? I mean, you have to have that kind of focus, and you have to get them to buy into the program. I mean, it's easy when you've had success like I have for people to buy in. They're going to listen to you, you know. But for everybody, you have to make the sale. You have to make them believe that they're capable of doing this, and have the constant reinforcement every day on what's good. When they're taking good strokes, you got to tell them you're taking good strokes. When they're taking bad strokes, okay, we got to change this. And so you're constantly seeding the brain to get people to respond the way you want them to respond.
Yeah, beautiful. I think one of my favorite takeaways from being an attendee at your camp was just the idea, when you're working on rowing, there's so many things to think about. There's so many little technical pieces that can be, and you can get so overwhelmed easily. And one of my favorite takeaways was the idea of looking for the most limiting factor. What's the one thing that's really getting in your way the most that you can be zeroing in on instead of getting so overwhelmed because it can feel like whack-a-mole otherwise. Like, oh,
Oh,
I
for
got this now.
sure. That's the point. You always look for the most limiting factor to correct first, and then you work backwards from there to the more finer things. You know, uh, there. It's just that systematic approach to coaching that allows you to do that, right? And in rowing, you have to feel what's going on. You get on a rowing machine or whatever, you just go back and forth, and there's nothing there. In a boat, you have to feel the water. You have to understand how you're locking on and how you want to accelerate. You have to be focused on relaxing. And Danielle, with all the drilling, 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 drilling we do, the one time that you don't think is when you race. When you race is when it just happens. Some of the best races I ever had in my life, people will go, wow, that was a great move you put on at the 750-meter mark. Don't have a clue. You're just reacting to all of the things and all of the experiences that you've had up until that point, and your body and your brain immediately knows how to respond and move through it.
Beautiful. How do you prep for races?
I've always been the guy, who couldn't eat before a race because I'd always want to be sick. I always had tremendous amount of nerves, and I think that's the big thing for me, just trying to relax before a race, and I think I got to the point where I could be sitting in a boat bay a half an hour before a race, close my eyes and fall asleep.
Wow.
Just kind of that whole meditative thing where, okay, it's going to happen. We know what the body's going to feel like when you're going through this. Let's just let it happen.
Wow. Okay. What's one thing you always try to help a rower or athlete believe in for themselves?
Believe in themselves. I mean,
Yeah.
like I mentioned earlier, the body's infinite, and too often people are ready to to tell themselves, I can't go there. I can't achieve that. I had one young lady that I coached at the University of Massachusetts, and she was very good. I coached her for a few years. She couldn't break 7 minutes on the erg, which is a big deal if you can break 7 minutes on the erg for a woman. It's a really big deal. And I'm watching her, and the last time she took her 2K erg test, she was like 701.2 or something like that. And at that point, I said, let's just paddle and relax here for about 5 minutes. All right. Then I took a bag and I put it over the monitor. And I said, okay, I want you to do another piece at about three-quarter pressure, not looking at any of the stats or anything else. Well, she finished the 2,000-meter piece. I took the bag off and she was 656, right?
Wow.
And
Yeah.
it's that thing about that. And at that point, she never looked back. She went on to make national teams and whatever. But at that point, it's like I can relax. I can do this. You take the numbers out of it and you just let them feel the rhythm and press and just think, okay, this is good, this is good, this is good, and you're that much faster. A lot of times people try too much, and it's one thing my wife says all the time, less is more. Sometimes when you can really relax, you're going to get more out of it.
Yeah. That's a great story. Thanks for sharing that. You've got more rowing stories than most of us have strokes.
I
What's
got
some
I got more
favorite?
years than most people.
Well, let's hear some of your favorite stories, either funny, humbling, or even both.
Okay, so I'm alone, and I traveled Europe alone a lot. It was me and my single, and at times you'd hook up with other international scullers and you travel the circuit together. But at one point, I get to Ratzeburg, Germany. I had raced at Henley, I believe, and a couple of other places, and I'm at Ratzeburg for a week's training. I'm going to race there and then go down to the Netherlands, right? So I get to Ratzeburg, and I had been there as a junior, but this is like 6 7 years later. I'm staying at this. It's basically a big dormitory where people can rent rooms and stuff and row out of the thing. So if you come in an eight, somebody greets you and says, okay, here's where you put your boat, and this is how you get to the other race course and whatever. A single sculler, okay, they give you your room key. So it's a beautiful day, and in Ratzeburg you have the giant Kutchensee, which is a big lake, and then you go through a little canal and you go to the Ratzeburg Zee where the race course is. So it's a beautiful day. I'm going to row across the Kutchensee. So I'm rowing and I'm rowing and I'm rowing, and coming up on the other side, and I see people on the beach and beach chairs and umbrellas and everything else, and all of a sudden, ringing out around my boat, three gunshots. Right? I rode into East Germany. Nobody told me East Germany was on the other side of the lake.
Oh my goodness.
So I whip around. I rode back to the Rotor Academy, and I said they were shooting at me. He said, "You didn't row to East Germany. That is verboten."
Oh my goodness. Wow.
Yeah.
So, but you were rowing pretty fast at that point.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
Oh
It's all
wow.
good, but rowing has been a joy, and it's taken me all over the world. There are so many stories, so many things that you've done, so many people that you've met, and now as I coach masters, I'm getting to enjoy so many of the places that I had raced early on and never really could enjoy. When you go to Luzerne to race on the Roadsee, or the Netherlands to race on the Bosbound. You saw your hotel room and you saw the race course, and that was about it. You came in, you did your thing, and now we go and we row on these race courses, and then we go do all the sightseeing around it, and really enjoy the beautiful places that rowing takes you to.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing. Any other stories that you'd like to share right now?
Oh, let me think. Normally they just come to me.
Yeah, I remember one about some smokers on a bus
Oh,
with a
that was
teen.
interesting. Yeah. So we were staging, and staging is when an Olympic team is brought together, all the different disciplines, track and field, basketball, everything. The staging, you're brought to a place. Uh, in 1972, staging was in Washington D.C. All right, and we got measured for our uniforms, and some CIA guy will come in and tell you about the political leanings of the country that you're about to go in, and the do's and the don'ts of being in a foreign country. You get to see the president, and when we were in Washington, we got to hop on buses during the day, and we were taken out to all of the monuments and stuff. So we get off the bus and we're at the Iwo Jima monument, and when we get back on, there are these four guys in the back of the bus, and they're all smoking, middle-aged guys, and they're smoking. And I turned around and said, "Yo, pal, can you put the cigarettes out? We got some athletes here." And their response was, "Kid, we'll have our gold medals long before you have yours," right? They were the U.S. shooting team, all right? And these guys, when we were over in Munich, right, realized when the Palestinians started shooting up the Israeli dorms and whatever, that there was going to be a situation at the airport. And those guys volunteered to run that sniper thing at the airport, and the Germans refused, and a lot of people died. And I always thought, had our guys been involved with that operation, people might have lived, but you meet all kinds of people over time.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, so such rich, different experiences you've had through the
Hmm.
years. So, what's different, do you think, through the years with the rowers you've coached? Anything that's different about the rowers you coached back then versus now, or surprisingly the same?
I think to some extent, for the top on athletes, they're all just that dedicated, and whatever. What's changed is the equipment. The equipment today is much better than anything I rode in. We rode in wooden boats, and no two boats were alike. And today everything is pre-preg carbon fiber, and everybody is building great equipment. Uh, I think with the expansion of the sport in the United States, thanks to Title IX and gender equity, our sport exploded. I was lucky enough. I was recruited away from coaching the Coast Guard Academy to coach the University of Massachusetts women. I did that for 24 years, and you saw how our sport just exploded. With all of these different programs starting, and the reason for it was that you needed women's rowing to be able to balance off men's football as far as the gender numbers within the universities. And my athletic director, Bob Markham, actually had a lot to do with that. I found out talking to another guy who's really big in the Massachusetts school systems just recently that he was Bob's assistant at UMass. And after a year of our program going, he's on the phone. He was a big BCS football guy. He's on the phone talking to the Michigans and the Ohio's and all of the other big football schools, saying the way to go with this gender thing is women's rowing. You got to get these women rowing, and the sport exploded. And I have to say, when we started with the women, we had absolutely nothing. I had to borrow boats from friends to get this program going before we could have our equipment even made and stuff like that. And I tell people that if I said, Saturday morning, be at the boathouse at 7 a.m., everybody bring a shovel, all of these women would show up 7 o'clock with a shovel, knowing that they were going to dig from the boathouse down to the docks and clear all the snow to get ready to go out and get in the boats. I mean, these gals wanted it so bad, and they work so hard for it. And I think, 25 years later, with all of these kids getting athletic scholarships and stuff like that, I don't know if it's quite that good, as far as, they're expecting people to do for them where the older gals did for themselves, and
Yeah.
again, they wanted it more. They knew how important it was, and I guess today
Yeah.
people just expect that it's going to be good.
Yeah. I can appreciate that. What's rowing taught you about life that no other experience could?
Rowing is life, and I remember my good friend Melch Bergen, who was a famous Swiss sculler. He said, rowing, you know, is imitates our lives. We start off the line, and we start stumbling off the line. We go really slow, and then all of a sudden we pick up speed, and then we get into the mature point of our life where we have a steady rhythm, and we're driving, and then you're moving towards the finish and you're dying again, you know. you know but it's all about that management, that management of your race, and the management of your life. It's like, you can't run through life. You have to smell the roses, and enjoy it. And I think that's part of the process. That's what was appealing for me as a kid. I left the Bronx. I got on a plane. I'm flying all over the world. I'm seeing all these great places. I'm doing all these great things. And as long as I kept working, I kept enjoying that. And it gives you a little bit of perspective. The thing about rowing, Danielle, is you learn to endure. And I think for young people, for everybody, there are going to be setbacks in your life. A parent might die. Your children might get hit by a car. It's like whatever life throws at you, rowing teaches you you always have enough to finish. You can keep going. And I
Yeah.
think that's a big part of it, for me. And I've seen it firsthand after 62 years involved with the sport. I've seen the resilience of people when they've had bad times in their life. They're able to get through it, because of the strength that they knew they had within themselves.
Yes, I love that. Training for more than just racing, right? I think that's why I had to include the name in the title of this podcast, The Rowing Therapist, because I feel like rowing has done way more for me in my own journey than any other thing I've tried. So just appreciate your wisdom and insight on that. So you're still coaching, you're still engaged. What keeps it exciting for you after all these years?
Well, I'll tell you, Danielle, honestly, I prefer going out and rowing myself every day. you know, and sometimes it's like, okay, I've got to go to Budapest, next month, and coach some people, and it's like, oh, do I really want to do that? I really just love getting out with the old boys and the old gals every morning, and just doing it myself, but it's paying it forward, and especially coaching masters. Masters are sponges. They just want as much information as you can throw at them. Uh, Normally they don't get any coaching in their own programs at home, or, really don't understand the sport the way it should be taught. And they're so excited during the camp. And at the end of the camp, as a coach, you just go away feeling so good about what you've done. That people are so appreciative. And Mark, my partner, is sending me texts this morning. From people that we had in Bled, Slovenia, on the beautiful course there. Last month, saying, you know, I knew from the time the camp ended till I could get back on the water, I wouldn't be on the water for a month, and I was afraid I'd lose, but I started doing that first drill that you told me to do, and all of a sudden it just started coming back, and you feel really good about that. I work with a junior gal. She just won the junior speed orders, and won't be racing the single in at the Junior World Championships, but she'll probably be stroking the quad, and you just see that excitement there too. But like I said earlier on, you're training that junior the same way you train that master, the same way you'd want to be training that Olympian, at that high level.
Yes, beautiful. So, any races coming up for you? Do you still race?
I do. I don't like to race much in the sprint races. I prefer the distance races. But in the third week of July, I'll be coaching a camp in Worcester, Massachusetts. I've done that camp for the past couple of years, and then the day after it, my friend Joe May, who runs that club, uh, he is running the Worcester Sprint, so I'll stick around the entire day, hang out, talking to people, talking to other coaches. I'll row my sprint race, and then I'll go home happy.
Yeah, sounds like a
But
great
for
time.
me, the focus are the distance races. I'm looking forward to racing in the Green Mountain Head, and the head of the Housatonic, the head of the Charles, the head of the Schuylkill, you know, and to some extent, it's more than just racing. It's reunions. I tell people, like, about the head of the Charles. I say, you have your family holidays like Christmas and Easter or whatever. Your rower's holiday is like the head of the Charles, the head of the Schuylkill, where you're going back and you're meeting your rowing family. You know,
Yeah, awesome. Love it. Um, Something that changed for me when I was introduced to rowing was my perspective around aging. Just seeing all of these fit, strong, healthy rowers well in their years. I was trained by, I mean, I learned to row by a coach that was in his 70s, and I was so impressed. He could pick up his shell
hmm
and lean down and pick up his oar or something. I'm still a little scared to try myself. But just seeing all of these people really just challenging what I had in my mind as getting into those years. So, what would you say if someone felt like it was a little too late to start rowing or coaching?
I don't think it's ever too late. I've started people in their mid 60s, and they can get on with it great. I am impressed with these people as well. Last year, the past couple of years, we've been going to Turin, Italy for the 10K Silver Skiff Regatta. And I've got a couple from Colorado, and he's like 85, and the Po River, because of the snow melting in the mountains, is running really fast. So for this 10K, it's 5K up, stake turn, 5K back. Going up, you're like 7 minutes slower than you are coming back. So the water's really moving really fast. I'm out there in my single, and I'm thinking, boy, this is going to be tough. And the 80-year-old guy is able to handle that course as well and do it just as well. I tell people, everybody says to me, yeah, you're 76, you're looking so fit. I go through TSA, and the guy goes, sir, you got to take off your shoes. Oh, I'm 76. You don't have to take your shoes off after you're 75. God, you're 76. You look great. Motion's the lotion. There, your body will just keep getting stronger. And in our sport, where you use 85% of the muscles in your whole skeletal system, you know, just that daily activity, you're maintaining your strength and your flexibility and everything else. If you stop, you lose it. So you have to continue to just do it day after day after day, and that's the point. You know, that's the thing about it for me. I want to be out there every day. I don't take a day off unless the water forces me off. I just want to get out there every day, and you finish the row and you have your cup of coffee and banana sitting on the bench with your buddies, and it's like the rest of the day is gravy. Life is so good here, and who's got it better than an oarsman gliding over the water? It, it's just great, and that's why you're seeing now, this will be the 60th year of the Head of the Charles coming up or whatever. I mean, the categories for 70-year-old guys are just filling up, and then there are guys rowing in their 80s and a few in their 90s. It's incredible that you can keep going like that, and I think that's really positive.
I agree. I agree. I attended my first World Regatta and Nationals last year, and I was also just impressed with the number of octos and races with the octogenarians and above, and some 90-year-olds, like you mentioned. It was just incredibly inspiring to see them out there still enjoying the sport and moving their body and enjoying that independence. So definitely.
There are two octogenarians from the New York Athletic Club that were there when I started as a kid, and they go every year to that regatta. You know,
Wow.
they're there
Yeah,
every year. They just love it.
that's amazing. So if there's one message you hope people would walk away after hearing this conversation, what is it?
Get in a boat. Danielle, it's the best therapy you can have. It clears your mind. It gets you organized. Um, as a kid, I can honestly say that I tell people I had ADD before had initials, and I was dyslexic. And it wasn't until I got into the boat and started to train that I got my focus and could overcome all that stuff. But
Wow.
even today, I go out. I've got to write a letter or I've got to write an article for a rowing magazine or whatever. I'm on the water. I'm going through that in my brain, and then I come home and I sit down at the laptop and I knock it out. It's just fantastic. The peace you get.
Yeah.
So much peace.
Yes, absolutely. And as you mentioned earlier, that ability to move through struggle in life, right? From
Hmm.
being challenged, from allowing yourself to work through and build that endurance. And it's so applicable to so many other facets of life. So
Hmm.
Jim, I just want to thank you so much for your time, for your wisdom, for all the ways that you continue to contribute to this amazing sport. Thank you so much for your time and for being with us today.